In the traditional animation process, your senior animators, who are the highest paid, would draw in the keyframes. So they might draw in frame 1 this figure of Wally walking, and in frame 20 sort of the end of the sequence where he's walking off the stage. And then they would turn over to their junior animators or their lesser paid animators that they commonly called tweeners to fill in the frames in between those two keyframes. And in Flash we have this thing called a tween, which is letting Flash fill in between keyframes for an animated sequence. In a previous exercise you've had a goose fly across the stage using frame by frame animation, and we had a flight cycle consisting of 6 frames, which were actually 4 drawings for that goose. And then with each frame we simply moved the goose a little further to the right and swapped out the symbol for the next frame of the sequence of that flight cycle. And it probably took us about 10-15 minutes to create that whole sequence. We also had a cloud in the background to help sell that. Well, we're going to do the same animation in this video, but we're going to use a movie clip and use a tween to have the goose fly across the stage. You'll see this is a much quicker process, but I wanted you to learn frame by frame animation first, because there are times when you have to use frame by frame animation, and it also helps give you some background, some philosophical background into how animation has been done traditionally. So I'm going to go into a new project, and let's set our background color here. This is 550 by 400. I'm going to use a light blue for the background. And I'm going to go to the library, and here in the library I'm going to go find that library I've opened for the goose. There are my symbols, and I'm just going to select all of these and drag them onto the stage, and that'll put them into my library for this Untitled project. And I'm just going to delete them. So they're now in my library. Now we're going to create a movie clip of the goose flapping its wings in one position, sort of like a tracked shot. And there are a couple ways I can do this. One is I could simply bring the goose on stage first. I can right click on it and choose convert to symbol, or I can go to the modify menu and choose convert to symbol, or press the F8 key. And I'm going to call this MC Flying Goose. It's a movie clip. I'll leave the registration mark in the center. And now this movie clip has its own timeline. And if I were to double click on the movie clip, I went from scene 1 to MC Flying Goose, and I'm now seeing the timeline for that movie clip. So it's a timeline within a timeline. Movie clips are the building blocks to much more complicated animations and to interactive things such as creating games in Flash. Okay, so I'm in the timeline now for this movie clip, and just as we did before in our tracked shot, I'm going to insert a keyframe, and I'm going to swap this goose for goose 2. And then I'm going to insert a keyframe, swap this goose for goose 3. You can do the same thing, insert a keyframe, swap the goose for goose 4. And now we need to bring the wings back down to complete our cycle, so one more keyframe, swap for goose 3, and then our last keyframe of the 6 is we'll bring the goose to goose 2. So as we repeat this, it would then go back to 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2. So that's a complete flight cycle. Now I'm going to go back to my scene. Notice I only have one layer in scene 1. Here's my goose. You can see that it is an instance of MC Flying Goose. And I'm going to bring the goose to just off the stage here. Now let's also go into the properties for our page. I want to make sure this is 12 frames rather than 24, because that was how this flight cycle was designed. And I've got a keyframe of frame 1. I now want to figure out how long the sequence should take. I'm going to say maybe I'm going to have it fly across the stage for 4 seconds. So I'm going to go to about frame 48, and I'm going to insert a keyframe. And on this keyframe, I'm going to take my goose movie clip, and I want it to basically come off the stage over here on the right. So we have frame 1, we have frame 2. We've just completed the job of our senior animators. Now we need to turn this over to our tweeners to draw the frames in between. So here's how we create what we call a classic tween in Flash. I'm going to go to any frame in between those two keyframes. And by the way, one of the rules is that to do a tween, each keyframe can only have one movie clip, or we can use text, or we could use a group or a button, but it can't be ungrouped objects. So it's one symbol or one group item per keyframe per layer. So if I wanted to have multiple geese here, they have to be on multiple layers. Alright, so the tweener would come in and choose any keyframe in Flash, and they would right click and choose classic tween. Now there are three types of tweens here. We have motion tweens, shape tweens, and classic tweens. Motion tweens and classic tweens only work on symbols, particularly movie clips, buttons, text, and grouped objects. Shape tweens work on ungrouped shapes. So that's why it's grayed out. Classic tween is the old motion tween from previous versions of Flash, and starting with Flash CIS4, they introduced a newer way of doing this called the motion tween, and they renamed the old motion tween classic tween. Personally, I still prefer the classic tween to the newer motion tween, but that's partially from years of experience of working with this classic motion tween. That's still the way I like to work. So I'm going to show you the classic tween first, and then later on we'll look at how to do the motion tween in a later video. So I'm going to choose classic tween. And what it did was it now created or moved our object along the stage from left to right. Now you're saying, wait, but the wings aren't moving. Ah, but as this movie clip moves across the stage, remember, it's got its own animation. It's got its own timeline. And it's going to play that timeline as it moves. So watch this. Let's test our movie. And there's our goose flying across the stage. As you can see, tweens can be a huge time savings in comparison to doing frame-by-frame animation. Let's go ahead and just add in our cloud. Now if I were to add the cloud in on this layer, it would break the tween. So just to demonstrate that, I'm going to go to frame 1. I'm going to go to my library. I'm going to bring in the cloud, and I'm going to drop that cloud over here on the stage somewhere. I'm going to send it to the back because we want it to be behind the goose. But look at my tween on the timeline. I now get a dotted line instead of that straight line or straight arrow that was there. And that dotted line tells me there's a problem, there's an error. In fact, if I try to play this, let's watch what happens. Now the cloud's moving, but no goose. And the reason being, it didn't know what to do now because there are multiple objects here. So I'm going to take this cloud, I'm going to delete it. Let's add a new layer. I'll call this layer cloud. I want to put it on the background, on the bottom. I'm dragging the layer to the bottom, and I'm going to paste in my cloud, position it where I want it. Now my timeline for the goose, which is layer 1, let's name that goose, has a solid arrow line. There's no problems. And as I drag the playhead, I can see the goose moves across the stage. Now let's just test this. And there is our animation. So I showed you we can create a movie clip simply by bringing an instance of our drawing on stage, right-clicking on the instance and choosing Convert to Symbol, or going to the Modify menu and choose Convert to Symbol, or press F8. There's another way we can create movie clips I just want to make you aware of, and that is under the Insert menu, we can choose New Symbol, and I can name, I want a movie clip here, I'll call this one MC Flying Goose 2, just to differentiate from the previous one. I can choose the type, I want it to be a movie clip. I'm going to click OK, and now I'm in the editor for our movie clip. Notice I no longer see the stage. So the advantage of the first method was you could create your movie clip in the context of what else was happening on the stage. Here, you're creating a movie clip isolated from everything else. And I would simply choose MC Goose. Maybe I would position it where I want it in terms of the crosshairs. This is going to be the rotation point for the movie clip itself, even though each of these other movie clips have their own registration mark. And now I would create this the same way. I would add a keyframe in my timeline, click on the goose, swap it for goose 2, add a keyframe, select the goose, swap it for goose 3, add a keyframe, swap it for goose 4, frame number 5 goes back to goose 3, and our 6th keyframe is goose 2. So now I'm going to go back to my scene, and I'm going to add in another layer. Well, the second goose come in a little bit later than the first one, so I'm going to go into, let's choose maybe frame 10. I'm going to insert a keyframe here, and on this one I'm going to take MC Flying Goose 2 and bring that goose in. It's going to be a little bit lower than the first one. And I want to have this also come out to basically 48 frames. So I'm going to go up to frame 58, insert a keyframe, move my MC Goose 2 across the stage. Have it fly up a little bit. And let's create a classic tween for those. And I need to extend my cloud down, because once I get past frame 48, my cloud's going to disappear. So I'm going to insert a frame for the cloud layer, and now let's test our movie. First goose, second goose. Now I didn't have to create that second movie clip for that flying goose. I could use the movie clips over and over again, so I could bring in, say, 20 geese, and each one would use maybe MC Flying Goose, coming in at different stages. I simply wanted to demonstrate the process of creating a movie clip using the insert menu.